Chris, I am super impressed with you, and I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us today. Tell everybody here who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. This is awesome. So I'm Chris McKenna. I'm the founder of Protect Young Eyes. You can find us at protectyoungeyes.com, also pretty active on social media. And this is a space, Andy, I'm a CPA. Like, what in the world am I doing in
Okay.
internet safety, right? This is not the path that I guess I
Hey, man, I
envisioned for
feel you
myself.
100%. I feel you.
Right? But it's been fun. The Lord sometimes weaves and moves us in different directions, and we can either push back against that or follow. And it's been fun to follow. But, you know, having left, I was in business for a while. I was a consultant with Ernst & Young for over 10 years, but the Lord called me into the local church. But it was the time frame that was important there, right? So I was a junior high youth pastor from 2009 to 2016.
Mhm.
Right? The rise of social media, the rise of
Oh,
portable
yeah.
internet, right?
Yes. Hmm.
And so parents are asking questions. Chris, what's this new app? Tell me about this new Snapchat thing. If you can imagine a world when those apps are new, that's the world that I was living in,
Right.
right? And I was a consultant. That was my background. I love fixing problems. I'm like, okay, we can
Hmm.
fix this. So I did research, put together a small closed Facebook group, started sharing a quarterly PDF of my findings. That led to a big news story here in West Michigan about a girl who had almost been kidnapped through the
Mm.
Kick app, which for a while there was popular for all the wrong reasons. And that led to more popularity and people going, oh my gosh, there's somebody who's talking about these things. Because I can tell you, man, back in 2015, nobody was worried about social media. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was really digging into what these apps created for our kids in terms of access, and no one was talking about online pornography. So it was a pretty lonely space. And once people found out there was a dude talking about it, they're like, hey, come to our church, come to our school, talk to our kids. So we built a website and things kind of just flew from there. 6 years later, we're doing now, when COVID isn't in
Right.
the way, we're
Right.
doing hundreds of presentations. Before, I was March 12th, 2020, when the world changed, at least here in Michigan, and everything locked down, we were doing 350 plus presentations a year all over the country at schools and churches with a full team. So we love doing that.
Absolutely, man. And it sounds like you're out there spreading the good word, man. And that is awesome because I have discovered in doing this, you talk about you had one career and God led you here, and that's, copy and paste was happened in my life as well. And, it's amazing to see where he leads you. It's amazing to see like, hey, I never thought I was going to do this before. And now all these amazing things are happening. You're helping all these people. And that's fantastic, man. It really is. Um, I've had a couple of people on the show talking about this topic. I had Sean Clifford from Canopy on. I had your buddy Titania Jordan
Awesome.
from Bark
Yeah.
on. And it's funny. When I was wrapping up with Titania, she was like, by the way, you have to have Chris McKenna on your show. Like she almost made me like pinky promise that you were going to be on the show. So I was like, hey, he's on my radar. I know who he is. And I'm so glad that things worked out. But I've asked them this question and I want your take on it. Why do we need to protect our kids from what's online?
Yeah. Well, and Sean and Titania, I know them both. I've only recently met Sean in the past year. I've known Titania 4 years. Bark and PYE have a very similar sort of timeline in terms of our, you know, 2015, 2016 and to today. And I know her and Brian well. Here's the thing. We have amazing children, right? Curious children who have been given brains that during this period of adolescence shape and form and turn themselves into more efficient organs for adulthood. There is never a more shapeable time in the brain, again, like what happens during adolescence, where you have this explosion of synaptic activity, where it's creating all kinds of new paths, winnowing away those paths that we don't use based on how it's used. And that happens for years, right? Especially in guys, where the myelination process to solidify those neural pathways can take up until your mid-20s, okay? So for all of its complexity, the brain operates under a very simple principle. Whatever I feed my precious brain is what it learns to love, especially before age 16, right? That's the
Yeah.
neurological reality of our young people. Now, what's the technical reality of the devices that we put in their hands for protection? The reality is these are supercomputers with lowercase g, God-like intelligence that is being put into the hands of a brain that is, trying to find its way. And so when you combine those two things, not to mention when you talk about what's going on in the minds of young people, they have high reward sensitivity. They love being told they're awesome. And now we have all these features, likes and comments and ups and all these things. They have high relational sensitivity. They want to belong. And now we're trying to put them into, who are my friends? Do I get enough likes and all these things? Social media accentuates all of these things in a brain that just doesn't have the neurological capacity to handle what it's feeding it. Not to mention when you talk about the dopamine reward system and how just incredibly powerful that is, and the fact that the part of the brain that tries to regulate that, the prefrontal cortex, and pornography fires that up, that's not even active and plugged in yet into the, in the brain of a teenager. So the reason it's so important to protect just comes down to, that was a long-winded, but it comes down to a developing brain that doesn't have the mechanisms in place to handle God-like technologies that we're putting in their hands. Therefore, no matter what you do to prepare them, there are just some things that kids are not going to be able to handle in their technology.
So, Chris, I appreciate you, bringing a lot of science to this understanding. I think it's something as parents that we've kind of understood. A lot of times, parents like to, and humans really, we just like to buy a product and hope that this product is going to work. Today, we're talking about, beyond parental controls. And I think a lot of parents just kind of set those and walk away. And we need to kind of go beyond that. But just go ahead and give us like a baseline. What are parental controls? Are they actually useful tools for us as parents?
They are, but I think that that whole name just sets us up for an incorrect understanding of what they do and what their posture should be in our families, right? So just think of what it says, parental controls. Right away, that phrase sets us up for an us versus them relationship. What? Parental control? What is the exact opposite of what a teenager wants? Parental control, right? And so I think right from the bat, I can't stand that description, but unfortunately SEO forces us to use it because that's what the whole world wants to call them. And so we have to continue with that. At Protect Young Eyes, we've come up with what we call the digital trust framework. This is a set of 5 phrases that we think lead to a more probable scenario where parents and kids are working together and kids actually learn how to use technology well, okay? And the last part of that digital trust framework is caring control around coaching, right? So they're all C words. We want our posture with our parents to be one of coaching and not control. Because if we embrace the reality that they know more than we do, then trying to control them just turns them all into little digital ninjas. And instead, why not invite them in and in fact, call that out and say, you know what, I know that whatever control, be it bark or something else I put on this phone, you're probably going to find 6 ways till Tuesday to beat it. Why? Because you're a smart 14-year-old boy. And I get that. Now, here's the deal, son of mine. I don't want you to do that. This is trust. I have allowed you to carry this supercomputer with you, which means that I can take it away, but I don't want to do that. Why? Because I'm for you. I'm rooting for you. I want you to get this right. So we're going to use this thing. Why? Because whether you're 14 or 40, there's some things none of us need to see online. And guess what? Dad has protections too. And I make sure that my kids all know that parental controls are good for me too. I don't need to see some of that junk. That's another part of the framework is to copy me. I lead the way. I show you that technology parameters, guidelines that are good for any teenager are also probably good for all the adults in the house too, right? So parental controls, I think in the right context and in the right open and honest conversations are an awesome thing, but there's no such thing as set it, forget it. There's no such thing as a toggle that replaces parenting. There's no such thing as software that supplements conversations. Those things all just have to happen at the same time. And if that happens, then yes, parental controls can be a good thing.
I really like your response and leading from the front, and we'll get into that as we go. So it really sounds like we as parents, we don't need to be tech experts in order to protect our children online.
Oh my gosh, no. You're looking at a number one example of that, right? I'm a CPA who went into youth ministry, who then was like, well, let's try this internet safety thing. So one of the things that, I say to families all the time, and it's a really horrible way to start off a presentation when you're supposed to be the internet safety expert, is I'm not a tech guy. Anybody else in that camp with me? And they're like, okay, then why are we here? Aren't you supposed to be the tech guy? I'm like, no, listen, you may understand bits and bytes and networks and all that stuff. You can get all that right. But if you don't look your kid in the eye and let them know that no matter what happens online, that they can always land safely and softly with you and you mean it, then you've lost. But if you don't know anything about that stuff and you do that and actually admit that, you know what, I don't know everything there is to know, son and daughter of mine, you're always going to know more than I do. But know this, that every single time I let you get online, it's kind of like I'm letting 100 million people into your life, and that freaks me out. At the same time, I understand there are pressures to be in that world. You have friends that are in it, and the school and homework and everything is, I get that. So I need to meet you halfway here. Meet me halfway. I want to do this with you. Again, that gets into some of those really just heart to heart, open, honest, humble conversations with our kids. And I think if we do that, we have a decent chance of building what we call digital bridges between us and our kids, right? We want digital bridges of trust, of understanding between us and our kids. And I think that comes most easily through a posture of humility and of authenticity than it does of control and of spying and helicopter and all that other stuff.
Right. And you explained parental controls so well about how just the phrase, puts you at opposition with your kids. And it really sounds like you want to make your family a team against this thing because you're all in it together. I told you before, we got started here that one day I'm going to have to sit down and have this conversation with my kid and talk about it. So for those of us who are not looking forward to having these conversations, how do you suggest that we approach this, and when is the right time to start these talks?
Excellent question. Porn, predators, whatever it is. I ask parents to come up with an age, like just right now, whatever age you think is the right age. And I have parents do that in all my presentations. And what typically happens is, in the mind, you try to approximate when that issue might pop up. Like, when do I think my kid might first see pornography? That's going to probably approximate the age that I want to have the conversation. My rebuttal to that is, whatever age you think is the right age, subtract 2 or 3, and that's probably the right spot. Why? Because with the specific issue of pornography, understanding what we do about the brain, right? The thing that we say of protecting eyes, understand your brain of your kid, then understand your kid. You've got to understand the brain. And based on everything I just said, knowing that their brain is going through a massive rewiring, that they don't have a prefrontal cortex that has any amount of brakes. Their brain is all go and no slow right now. And then we put them in front of the super normal stimulus of pornography that fires up every neural pathway that is inside of their brain. Do you really think the conversation that you had one time last week about not looking at porn stands any chance of convincing that brain to not look? No way. What I want in that kid is years and years of door open, wide open, honest, like deliberately intentional, just out there conversations about pornography flowing through the mind of that kid, where when they confront that supernormal stimulus with that totally underdeveloped brain, it bounces up against years of conversations. It bounces up against years of phrases and actions and what to do when I see this thing. Dad's been telling me about this for years. I know exactly what to do. That's why, the what's the right age is where we want to start. Why? Because it's quantifiable. I can measure that. But if we wait until we're ready, it's too late, Andy. Mm-hmm. And what doesn't happen is, it's not as if having the conversation all of a sudden taints our kid. Like that just doesn't happen.
Right.
In fact, I would much rather have it that our conversations rob the brain and or the enemy, depending on what you believe in, right, of its curiosity power over our kids. Because if we haven't answered their questions, then Dr. TikTok, Dr. YouTube, and Dr. Instagram, and Dr. Google will.
Mhm.
And their office hours are 24/7. So we need to be more persistent, faster, earlier, more often. And I know that's a hard reality for some parents, but I really, really believe that every kindergartner should know the word pornography. And
Mm.
every kindergartner should know how to recognize it. And every kindergartner should know exactly what to do when they see the bathing suit area, however you want to describe it, that, pictures of naked people, anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, they need to know exactly what to do. And that has to happen so much earlier than we want it to.
And you've hit on something here, and I have been very open in talking to my son about what's good touch, what's bad touch. Don't let people touch you in your bathing suit area. Don't touch other people in their bathing suit area, even if they ask you to. That's wrong. But I
Yeah.
think it's a good idea to say if you see a picture of somebody else in their bathing suit area, because I'll be honest, that's not something that I had thought to do. So, I appreciate you bringing that up. So you said a minute ago, um, you think every kindergartner should know what pornography is. I see your point, and I think it's a good one. For parents, kind of in the mix, do you have the conversation about birds and the bees first, and then talk about pornography, or how does that work? Do you have an opinion there?
That's a good one. And this is where parents, your kids best. I want to more communicate principles than I do sort of hard and fast rules that are going to make you feel guilty because you're not doing it the right way or haven't done it on time or anything. That is never, ever my intent, because parenting is hard.
It is, yes.
So I'm communicating a principle of do it early and do it often. However you implement that, and this is the porn talk. When it comes to how that pertains to sex, I don't think those have to happen at the same time. I actually think it's easier to have the pornography talk, and it's okay to have the pornography talk in, first before you get into how it works. So that's at least how it's played out in my own home. Other parents do it differently, but at the time, he's now 9 going on 10, but at the time when he was 5 going on 6, and I said, hey, if anybody on the bus ever shows you a phone and there are naked people on it or bathing suit area or anything, like, that was a pretty easy thing to label as, hey, that's called pornography. And if you ever hear that word, dude, it's no big deal. Just come and talk to dad about it. That was a pretty easy lift just to kind of label a thing he sees, as opposed to explaining an act and a relationship and intimacy and mom and dad do that. That's weird. I mean, that's a more complicated conversation. It's still a right conversation and a good conversation, but I don't want parents to feel the pressure to have to check both of those boxes at the same time in any prescribed order. In my house, they were separated by a year or so, where it was like, yeah, okay, there's when that happens on a screen in a distorted, that's not a healthy way. That's called pornography. But actually, intimacy between a husband and wife is a good thing. It's just, this is an example of how it's been taken into a bad direction. And so, again, I'm using words that work for the McKenna family. Everybody's situation is a little bit different depending on your background, your faith, your belief, whatever it is. The principle I'm communicating is to do it,
Mhm.
like to have the conversation. And the other principle is to do it sooner than you want to. However that exactly plays out in your house is really, you're the best one to make that decision.
That's good, and I think that leaves families a lot of flexibility to kind of
Yeah.
feel out what's going on. And you talked about, this is not just a one-time conversation. This is not, you sit down and you talk about it and then you walk away, because when they see those images, that's just going to override all the conversations that they've had with mom and dad. And that's an extremely good point. So do we do we like, hey, it's Tuesday, it's 8 p.m. Let's talk about pornography, or is this more like as you see it, you address it, kind of continuing education?
Well, what I would say is that to go along with the phrase that we have at Protect Young Eyes, it's 10 before 10. So we want 10 solid conversations about pornography before age 10. Now, what does that mean? Chris, you telling me I have to put a PowerPoint and an outline together? No, I'm not. In fact, I would say don't ever do that. I don't want any of the 10 to
well,
be
there goes
that.
there goes my idea of using a PowerPoint presentation.
That's
okay.
right. Yeah. Put the projector away, the remote, none of that is needed, Andy.
Okay.
Instead, I'm looking for opportunities. It's being open to windows of opportunity that present themselves, right? And I think more often than not, those are shoulder to shoulder opportunities, car time, mealtime, bedtime, whatever it is. I also don't want us staring at our kids across a table, turning something that's awkward into something more awkward, right? So I think it's just being open. And again, I'm just always careful. I'm not one to heap any guilt or, you have to, or these things. I'm just saying, look for multiple opportunities. When you're driving down the street, it's like, hey, have you ever recently, have you seen anything online that bothers you? Remember, we've talked about what pornography is. Just know you can always talk to me, bud. It's all good. The door is wide open, and then just be done. You don't need a big response. You don't need them to say anything. Just make sure that their ears and their brain hears the fact that the door is still open. That's a conversation about pornography. And it lasted 15 seconds, maybe. That's what I'm talking about here is, and people freak out when I say this without context, but I want porn to be the norm. I want us to normalize that conversation with drips throughout their life, not dousings. We all probably raised by boomers like you and I were. We got dousings, one talk that was like a waterfall of staring at us about the birds and the bees, and it really wasn't that helpful. And I joke with my mom about that today. We have a great relationship, so she knows that. Instead, I want little drips, 15, 20, 30 seconds at a time. Why? So that they know that the door is still open. Because up against that, they're getting a pretty constant flood of messages from the world. And so that's why the multiple drips throughout as little reminders of what is right and what isn't are so, so important. But I want us to get over the fact that it has to be some big production.
And that's good. A little while ago, you talked about how, your kid might see something on the bus. When you and I were growing up, pornography was pretty much on a VHS tape or some cable channel, and it could be easier controlled. And while we may be able to control things in our house, we can't always control what other people do. So let's say in a scenario, your kid says, hey, I saw something, somebody showed me a picture on the bus today of a woman and she wasn't wearing clothes. I didn't know what to do. What do you say to that? How do you handle that situation? Because I know you definitely don't want to guilt the kid into some sort of a negative response to that.
Yeah. So number one, don't freak out. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. Because if you do, then even if for the past 9 conversations you said that they can tell you anything, none of that matters anymore. You just erased all of it. All it takes is one freak out to erase 10 conversations. It does. But right away, everything about your posture, your face, everything is open and curious. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but thank you so much. You did the exact right thing to tell me. No one's going to get in trouble here. You were awesome in telling me that. And make sure they know that that was the exact right thing to do. From there, the path can look different depending on the situation. So, there's the relational side, right, of making sure your kid knows that was the right thing to do. As a parent, then you're just kind of, how much did it impact them? I get the question all the time, how often should I bring that back up? Not too often. I mean, look for signs. Is it disrupting your child in any way with their sleep or their behavior? Those are signs that maybe we need to go a step further, because some porn exposures can cause trauma, right? It can cause what I just was in a webinar that we did at the end of July with a whole panel of experts. And I had a counselor on, and I relayed one of the questions from the Q&A from a mom who said her daughter, after a year of looking at pornography, finally came clean. She was 14, but now was having nightmares and couldn't sleep. And this counselor said, I think we underestimate the trauma that's caused. That is a sign of post-traumatic stress syndrome, those
Mm.
nightmares. And so get her into counseling. Let's talk through that. Let's treat that like PTSD and not just, she looked at porn. And so as a parent, we're looking for some of those signs and then taking action appropriately. That's kind of the relational side. There's also the technical side where, I'm always advocating for schools to have better policies around tech in the classroom, tech
Mhm.
in the school bus, which is supposed to be an extension of the school district, and yet is almost always fully ignored when
Mm.
it comes to tech use. So we have different policies and procedure examples of what schools can do. So I'm looking for ways to kind of plug those technical holes. If it's a friend's house where it happened, then it's probably an awkward but necessary conversation, reactively around, okay, this happened. Let's talk about how it can't happen the next time. On the proactive side, I think parents need to be much more proactive about understanding what the digital rules are in the homes where their kids spend time. Right? When I was growing up, it used to be just knowing whether or not the house had HBO Showtime or Cinemax. Like that was the extent of the
Right.
danger, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But now, like my son just spent the night at a friend's house, and dad and I were texting just kind of how the night was going to play out, and I said, "Hey, can you tell me a few things about your router? Because I know they're going to be on the switch, and I know there's, an iPad in the house. Do you have parental controls on your router? Because I most often see that as a nighttime problem spot." And he's like, "Oh
Mhm.
yeah, we got it. And there's no devices after 10 p.m." Like he then listed off all of these different rules in that house. And of course, no one's surprised when Chris from Protect Young Eyes kids spend the night or spend time at a house that they're going to get these questions from me because they expect that from me. But I know that's not super comfortable for a lot of other families, but I'm telling you, it's worth it if you do it from a non-judgmental posture of, hey, I know that the router can be a spot, or Wi-Fi at night can be a spot where for kids that's a trouble spot. And as a dad, I just want to make sure that that's covered at your house. Tell me some things about it. Or how do you control devices? I think those are the right conversations to have today. And I know it's not fun, but you're going to kick yourself if you don't, if your
Right.
son or daughter comes home and says that whoever showed them porn on an unprotected iPad.
Mhm. Yeah. And you brought up some good stuff about, at night this is an issue. I am a strong supporter of the fact that kids don't get to take their phones into their rooms. They don't get to take them at night, not only because of what they can look up and what they can see, but it's probably just not good for their brains to be overextended like that with a device in their
Right.
face when they're
Yeah.
supposed to be sleeping, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, sleep is a huge factor when it comes to how we try to blame a lot of things on technology, which I think is right, especially when we get into the teenage years on anxiety, depression, and other things. There's still a lot of science and you know um, testing and so forth and research that needs to be done. But there's no question that sleep impacts behavior. And there's
Mhm.
no question that devices at night interrupt sleep. And we also know that when you're tired, you just make worse decisions and you just feel worse about yourself. So kids need their sleep. And again, if we're going to lead by example, whether you're 14 or 40, there isn't a whole lot of productive, life-giving stuff that happens after 10 p.m. when you're connected to the internet. Let's just be honest.
True. Yeah, very true. Before we wrap up here, I want to ask you kind of a serious question that has been on my mind since I saw the movie Childhood 2.0. And I'll ask
Okay.
you this and see what you think. In
Yep.
that movie, and I had seen this separately, Bark had set up this account where they pretended to be a young girl and they waited how
Mhm.
long to see how, before a predator would talk to this young girl who just created an Instagram account. For parents of teenagers, especially teen girls, if they start getting sent lewd pictures by men that they don't know, they've never seen before, I think kids would be less forward, less likely to come forward because they want to keep Instagram because they're afraid that their parents will say, well, hey, if these, strange men are sending you these types of images, you can't have this anymore, so you can't be connected to your friends. How would you address that situation?
So I would I would say exactly something you just said, but I would change the way that you finished it.
Okay.
If you're going to give a child Instagram, everybody needs to tell your kids that they will probably receive lewd photos, but
Mm,
that's not going to lead to them losing their device. That's a reality of using an adult application when you're a 15-year-old girl. And I just think we need to be open and honest about that, right? We are expecting 15-year-olds, wonderful teenagers, guys or girls, to exhibit pristine behavior in an adult app that's used by over 1 billion people every single month. And then we get mad when they make bad choices with a brain that isn't fully developed. I mean, it's madness when you think about it. Okay. So let's just right up front say, you might make mistakes in this, or somebody might send you something that's really bad. I'm going to allow you to have Instagram with a few of those risks in mind. If we both agree that from time to time, I want to just ask you how it's going, and I need you to be honest. If you ever run into something, I want you to tell me about it. And my promise to you is I'm not going to freak out, and I'm not going to smash your iPhone, and I'm not going to rip it out of your hands and disconnect you from all your friends. But I need this to be a two-way conversation, right? That's the relational side. On the technical side, just last week, Instagram made it so that if you get the birthday right on your account, now you have a private account. Now you can change it, but by default, you have a private account. You can also make it so that your DMs only come through people that you follow instead of the rest of the world. Now, why it took Instagram 11 years to actually treat kids like kids with their features is a whole separate story. I still don't trust Instagram at all. But these are some features on the technical side that we can put in place. They're all things that can be undone, but I would say to my son or daughter, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make your account private. Why? Because I don't need 100 million people looking for you. I'm also going to make it so that DMs are only between you and your followers. Why? Because you don't want some of the creepy stuff that gets thrown around otherwise. Okay. And this is just the way we're going to use Instagram. You agree with those things, keep those things on. Great. You can keep the app, no problem, right? These are just whatever you are freaked out about the app, whatever horrible thing you think could happen while your kid is using the app, say it. Say it.
But that makes me uncomfortable, Chris.
Yeah, but you automatically give that situation, when it happens, less control over your kid because you've already talked about it. They need to know that this happens to everybody before it happens to them. Otherwise, that little voice in their head tells them they can't tell mom or dad because they think that they're the only one that this has happened to. That's just teenage human nature. And so whatever you're freaked out about, say it. And if it's awkward, say, this is going to be awkward, but here are some of the things that could happen. Again, just say it. I want us to say the things that we're afraid to say because it automatically creates trust between us and our kids.
Very cool. So it sounds like trust is really the key to all this. And man, I appreciate your time today, Chris. I know people are going to want to know more about you and Protect Young Eyes. Where can they find you online?
Yeah, just protectyoungeyes.com. We're pretty active on social media. We have some great tools there for families. We have a newsletter that gets shipped out about once a week, a little slower here in the summer because we're trying to not work so hard as we should be offline a little bit more. But we do research on digital trends. We send that out for free. We also have an app, Andy, that we created during the pandemic when COVID robbed us of our ability to be in schools and classrooms and churches. Then we knew they needed information still, so we scaled ourselves in a way that you can go to the Apple App Store or Google Play and find the Protect app. Just search for Protect Young Eyes. You can download that. It has all kinds of emergency help for porn, predators, sexting, mental health. It has digital trends videos. It has videos, 19 of them you can watch with your kids if you don't know how to talk to your kindergartner about pornography or about predators, or you don't know how to talk to your sixth grader about addiction or whatever. These are videos filmed with teens and young adults that you can sit down and watch with your kid. Let us start the conversation for you, and then you can continue it from there with questions that are right there in the app, plus 500 other mini lessons, Spanish and faith-based, whatever you want. It's all in that app for $3.99 a month, which for a cup of coffee is a pretty darn sweet deal. So that's the spot where we send parents who want some of that in my pocket on the fly, whenever I've got time, 5 minutes here and there. that's what the app was built for. And then we do talks. Those are opening up again, which we love. But all of that is there on the website as a spot to find whatever you're looking for families, whether it's how to set up your Xbox or how to, put these toggles in place that I mentioned related to Instagram. All of that is on the website at protectyoungeyes.com.
All right, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate your mission, man. God bless you in the future. Let me know if you need any help.
All right. Thanks, Andy. My pleasure.